For the first 10 million in business that we're going to do here, it's a sales operation. That's what it is. We have to get customers. And the reason we do is because getting customers to buy from us and paying for the product is an indicator that we're doing something that the public wants.
Warren Zenna, founder of the CRO Collective.
That's the evidence. People are paying for it, and they're consistently paying for it. If I can do that enough, a $10 million worth of that is like, okay, we got something here, okay? That stage of the company is like, when you think about a rocket, I think it's like 80% of the fuel of a rocket is used just to get it into the atmosphere. It's like all this fuel is like burned off just to get it to a place where it can have momentum. It's the same thing. You sort of have to burn off a lot of fuel to get the company to a point where it can coast a little bit, which means that you shouldn't hire anybody in any sort of strategic position until you're in that atmosphere. And it should be a sales effort, which means everybody that comes into the organization should be focused pretty much on looking at our network, our current network, the people inside of our world whom we already can influence, and seeing if they want to become partners of ours and getting product in their hands and having them use it so we can get customers, prove out the model, and then we have customers that we can test out and see how the product works. And that's it.
Hey, Warren, how are you today?
I'm great, Dan. It's good to see you.
Glad to be talking to you on the show. Psyched about our conversation. We've had many in the past over the year plus, maybe 2 years that we've known each other. And they're always great conversations. So I wanted to have this one with you in particular to talk about how stuff gets messed up in the world of startups. So to begin, I want to understand a little bit more about the CRO Collective, how you got there, and what your mission is.
Absolutely. No problem. All right, so, you and I both come from the marketing, advertising, sales, media world, right? We have a good background in that. And I grew up there for, 25 more years, mostly running sales organizations and then running marketing organizations and moving up the ranks, right? Becoming an executive, just like you, very similar track. I think probably around 5 years ago, sort of got tired of it. There's a lot of trials and tribulations associated with working for companies. It's not for everybody. It certainly wasn't for me. I've always had my own businesses on the side. I had an agency, which I still do. Anyway, I kind of have always had this notion, which sort of congealed for me in a way about 2019, 2018 was, companies have this issue, which is they have revenue misalignment is like a major problem they have, which is ostensibly they have almost like when they get to a growth stage, they end up with 3 separate organizations within the company. They have a marketing organization, they have a sales organization, they have a customer success organization. And many times they're running along parallel tracks, but not working together, not aligned. And I'm not talking about just collaboration, like getting along with each other and having meetings. I'm talking about real, true alignment where those 3 organizations are actually integrated operationally, data-driven and everything. It's very rare, in fact. And this is a congenital disease of most B2B companies. And it occurred to me that the solution isn't just new processes and new data sets, it's also leadership. Because without the way silos get broken down isn't just by connecting things, but also by making sure that there's a single person who's responsible for things. And I think that by giving too many people C-suite executive roles, you end up with too many chiefs. So the CRO role seemed to me like that's the perfect role for a chief revenue officer. Should be the person who really oversees the entire revenue function, which in my view is the original way CROs should have been deployed anyway. For some reason, over the last 15 years or so, CROs became heads of sales almost predominantly. There's a very loose, if not almost completely ambiguous way in which CROs are defined. You get 8 different definitions of a CRO based on which company you talk to. And that's not good. Without that sort of codified definition, you can end up with ambiguity, which creates creativity, and sometimes creativity isn't good in these situations. Everyone knows what a CMO does. Everyone knows what a CFO does. So why is there so much ambiguity around a CRO role? So I set out to solve that because I thought that it would solve a bigger problem. So we kicked off the CRO Collective with the objective to bring more precision to the definition of the role, Chief Revenue Officer, train people to become Chief Revenue Officers, and most importantly, also work with founders and CEOs to help them appoint and ensure that their CROs that they hire are hired for the right reasons, that those CROs appointments are successful. So that's what we do.
Love it. How big is the collective?
So we've got a small group of members of the CRO Collective community right now. Could be like 50 people. It's growing all the time.
That's pretty big.
Yeah, I mean, I got a pretty good response when I first launched it. Only about like 4 weeks ago. I was frankly reluctant to do a community, and I'm still sort of trepidation about it. But I think that there's a lot of benefits to it. We'll see. But my courses I've been running since 2018. I've done about I think it's been 16 or 17 versions of the course now. We have an average of 10 to 15 people per course. It's targeted specifically to revenue leaders, people who, like you and me, are probably ready for the chief revenue officer role. We just need to kind of know how to get there. Meaning it's not for like frontline salespeople or BDRs or SDRs. It's not that sort of thing. So it's a pretty nicely. It's good. I mean, like anything, I'm in my own growth stages. I think I've certainly found agreement in the marketplace that what I'm doing is something that everyone wants and makes sense. It's now just getting enough people to sort of sign up and go through the system.
Yep. So what would you tell a founder of a growth stage company, maybe a Series A? How would you approach the idea of setting up a sales organization and then eventually bringing on a CRO?
So let's make sure we're talking about the same thing.
Yep.
So how big is this company in the scenario that you're?
Let's call it Series A. So maybe they're pretty much have their ICP figured out. Maybe they've gotten 8, 10, 12 million bucks in their A round. The founder has led sales and basically run the whole company up until this point. And they hired or maybe not, for you to decide how you answer the question. Maybe they hired a VP of sales. They've got somebody handling some marketing. They've got a post-sale customer success effort going on. And they're thinking, all right, how do we get to the next level?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's just say that for the sake of this conversation, you're the CEO of this company.
Okay.
Right. So I'd say, Dan, appreciate the question. What are your sales numbers right now?
Oh, good question. We're doing 4 million in sales, annual ARR.
And are you asking me this question specifically because you're thinking about hiring a chief revenue officer?
Yeah, it just seems like that's what I'm supposed to do.
I see.
My investors are telling me go hire a CRO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get it.
I don't know if that's the right thing to do. I'm a technically inclined founder. I don't really have a commercial understanding.
Mm-hmm. And you're getting this advice. I apologize. So you're getting this advice from both maybe your peers, the market in general, trends, but is it also, are the people that just gave you that money, are they also asking you to do this?
Yep. Because they're telling me, I just gave you X amount of millions of dollars. You need to grow revenue real fast. And what they're not telling me is I need to do it on their timeline, which is based on the fund's expiration or the fund's completion. And they need to bring a return to their LPs, right?
This is the common scenario, right? So now to kind of switch gears and remove the fourth wall, so to speak, it's too early for you to bring on a chief revenue officer. This is not a good time for you to do it. And the reason I say that is because what you need, and I think you know this, is you need someone to run sales. That's most important to you right now at this stage, right? You need to build more customers, get more customers into your funnel, get more customers into your customer group, right? So that you can get more understanding of how the product works and get more renewals and build up more of a complex sales and marketing organization. And I think that once that's done and you have a bit more of a complex sales organization where you've got a sales leader and maybe a couple of regional directors, or maybe you're managing a team of people, and there may be either some complexity in terms of different products that people are selling or different regions that they're selling in, and you're managing that. And then there's a marketing organization that has a budget that's, spending money on things like maybe, I don't want to necessarily advertising, but definitely developing content and building brand marketing and getting out there. Now what's going to happen is you're probably going to get to 10 or 15 or even 20 million in revenues. And your company is going to be a much different profile, where a chief revenue officer would absolutely be a more appropriate person to hire. And the reason I bring that up is because the definition of a CRO is maybe different than what you're thinking. It's not someone to run sales. It's someone to oversee and build a more aligned revenue engine for your company.
So as a founder, continuing with this scenario, this role play type of thing, I've got my hands in everything. I'm wearing all the hats: operations, tech, sales, marketing, post sales, doing it all. Um, I think I'm going to struggle with having a leader come in here and let them do what they need to do. And now, me personally, Dan Hurwitz, I have come into organizations where they've said, "All right, Dan, go for it, do your CRO thing," and I do, and they can't let go. And there becomes a back and forth between the CRO and the founder who thinks that it should be done their way. And in the end, sure, it's your company. You've been doing it this way the whole time, and you have brought in several customers, and that's great. But there comes a point where you need to move on and let go of the reins and let the CRO handle their job. My guess is you see this constantly. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, comments. If you got a story or two to tell, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, this is common. So, and it's understandable, right? I mean, it's their company, right? It's their baby, so it's, there's some empathy there, even though it's not good for the business for the founder to hold on to the reins. It's understandable. And so I think if I'm an incoming CRO, the first thing that you want to do is what we already did in this conversation, is establish if it's the right time for one. So the common thing I see happen, let me tell you where some fuck ups happen. So the CRO is incoming, they're getting an interview, and they see a couple things, like they see a title and maybe some money, and they're very enticed by that. And so they're talking themselves into getting this job because they want the title and they want the money. And they're not thinking about the position or the role or the way that they're being set up for success. They're not thinking long-term. They're thinking short-term. They're like, oh, great, I'm going to get this job. I'm going to, be persuasive and answer the questions in a way that's going to get them to hire me. And then I'll figure it out, once I'm in there, and that's like a recipe for disaster, because you don't figure it out. You find out then that you're not going to figure it out. You find out that pretty much the way you expected it to be is exactly the way it's going to go. And that's usually when I speak to CROs who reach out to me and they're like, I'm in a really bad situation. This is very common. They hired me to be the chief revenue officer, and there was some ambiguity in the beginning. They sort of told me that they wanted me to run sales, but they also told me that they wanted me to run the marketing organization and grow customers. But I'm really finding that all the more strategic things that I'm trying to do, they don't want to do them. They pretty much just want me in deals. As a matter of fact, they're even giving me a quota now. Like, I don't know how this happened, and I'm really frustrated because this isn't what I expected. And I don't know what to do. I think that either they're going to fire me because they think I'm too annoying, or I'm trying to push my way outside of what they want me to do. And I'm mad because I feel like they sort of gave me this false sense of what expectations are about what I'm going to do. And now they're reneging on it. And there's resentment. I'm sort of angry at him, my boss, a little. We don't really talk about this stuff. And when I do, it gets defensive. And so I'm sort of hiding in my office or whatever the case may be. And I'm really running sales. And what do I do about this? So the first thing I asked is, well, how many of these things that you're talking about did you sort of sense when you were interviewing for the job that you chose to overlook because you wanted a title and you wanted some money, right? These are extremely common things. And, I can usually they go, yeah, you're right. I sort of saw an opportunity for me to get a CRO role, and I wanted that role, and the way people think is, it's sort of like not visible to them, but they imagine themselves, going on LinkedIn and announcing their CRO position to everybody. It's crazy how our brains work. We do this stuff, or maybe getting like a CRO license plate or some bullshit. I mean, people really think this way, and they don't realize it because, human beings are very tantalized by the idea of being given, not just authority, but power, and we reward power in our society, right? If you get a C-suite role and you announce it, you get like a crazy amount of influx from people. First, like, whoa, you got a chief revenue officer role or a chief X role, whatever it might be. So all that comes in. That's very stimulating. And, all the work I've been doing for the last 15 years, it's good to be validated for something like that, And then the second thing too is, who doesn't want to go home and tell their wife that they got hired as a chief revenue officer? It's good, makes her feel comfortable, like she married a winner, and those are all things that, I'd say men in particular are very like stimulated by. And then there's the money, right? They're paying me a good amount of money. I'm going to get some equity. Like all these things fall into ways that as professionals, we've been conditioned to be very persuaded by and very almost sort of like seduced by, if I will. Okay. And I made this mistake. So I'm guilty of this, right? So then what happens is all those things really are not important. No one really gives a shit. No one cares that you were a CRO, you know? I mean, only reason that people care if you're a chief revenue officer is if you maybe are now being given a budget that you can make purchasing decisions with. Now everyone wants to be your buddy. All these vendors start calling you. They take you to Yankee games or golf matches and stuff because they want your budget. And it can also be very delusional. Like you could think that all of a sudden now you've got this whole big group of people that want your attention now, when in fact they just really want your budget and they don't really give a crap about you. As soon as you lose a job, you're never going to hear from these people again. Maybe a handful of them will call you because they're smart enough to know you might move on to another position, but most don't. And so now you're just in a bad situation. Like now you got this title. The money isn't as good as you thought it was. The equity doesn't mean much. It's sort of the luster of that goes away because you realize it could possibly not be worth anything. You realize the company is not being run as well as you thought it was. And partially now you're responsible because now you're a C-suite executive. Now it's like partially your fault. So what I say to these guys is, that's what you did. Like, don't beat yourself up about it. Don't get all kind of down on yourself. Just recognize that you were seduced by the normal egotistical trappings that most people do, and don't do it again. Like, let's now think about this better, right? Be more scrutinizing about the way in which you enter in situations where you're going to be given this level of responsibility, because it really ultimately has to work out. It's not just good in the beginning. It has to be good 3 years later. So I would say the first thing is that they did was they just sort of, they ignored the obvious signs because they wanted that stimulation. They wanted the recognition. And so the other thing too is that you probably didn't think about, Mr. CEO, which CRO that you just called me, is that you may not really know what a CRO does. What do you think a CRO does, right? I asked this question to them. And, many times like, what do you mean? There are like sales leaders like, well, it's not really the case, A CRO really should be someone, as you and I already discussed, Dan, runs the whole thing. So these are very common. I have a lot of situations like this. I probably speak to, over the course of a week, I'd say at least 2 people a week whom find themselves in what I call the buyer's remorse sort of CRO positions. And I'd say 3 things are consistently the case. One is they didn't know what a CRO does. They took the job too soon. The company wasn't ready for one. And number 3 was they had a false understanding of what the return on investment was going to be to take this job. And they didn't listen to the things that sounded like red flags. They sort of hoped that once I get in there, I'll be able to do something about this. That's very common,
So you just gave me 3 points of here's something to think about as a CRO.
Yep.
What are the 3 points to think about as the founder?
So the first thing,
to 3 simple things.
Great question. I think this is actually more important in my opinion. I think that the founders really need to be more, I don't want to say educated. It sounds kind of condescending. They just need to be a little bit more informed, because in the scenario that you originally presented to me in this conversation, we're talking about somebody who's in many cases not a commercial founder, like they're a technical founder. They're somebody who's smart enough to build a really great product. They know engineering and they know enough how to talk about that. But they don't really have experience in building companies, so that they sort of fall into these trappings where they are very easily persuaded by the board for reasons that, again, are empathetic. I mean, if a company gives me $12 million to spend, there's a natural relationship there of reciprocity, or I'm going to feel obligated to listen to them because they just gave me money. Like, why would I say no to them now? They just gave me $12 million. So there is this weird coercive part of that deal that you have to understand. And unfortunately, there isn't enough of this where if I'm a CEO of a company or a founder and I get somebody to give me an A round, which is good, by the way, if you get an A round, it's nice to have cash. But what does it come with? Like, not, I won't say the strings, but what's the expectations, right? What are the conditions associated with that? What's the relationship you're going to have with the people that lent you this money? Is this an organization where they're looking out for you? Are they going to advise you? Or are they going to be more like, okay, good, now you're under our portfolio umbrella and we want you to sort of do things in the way that we manage companies. We have a model. and I want you to run it this way, and it works, But, and again, not to be too cynical about these organizations, because I think that they're brilliant and it's great that they lend money to companies and they fund them, but they do have a business model that's their own, right? They have a formula that works for them. They know the type of companies they're going to invest in for different vectors and different types of criteria that they determine are ones that are going to make an opportunity for us potentially, should certain things happen. And then they have to be efficient. So they need to run all these companies in a similar way, because if they have a model, and it makes it easier for them to replicate that across all these different businesses. But, Dan, all businesses are different. If I have a portfolio of companies and they're not that all the same, then there has to be some nuances that, right? But you're falling into a business management model that in many times is predicated on them getting a return on their investment, which sometimes is weirdly inconsistent with your business. For example, let's say you're a founder and they say, we want you to get X number of new logos or net new business per quarter. Okay, fine. Now, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to ask. And the way in which we want you to do it is X, Y, or Z, because those are critical growth numbers that we need to see consistently from your business. Okay, fine. So then they deploy processes and motions in play that are going to achieve that, right? They're like, okay, so we want you to now do a certain type of outbound. We want you to hire an SDR group to start making phone calls and setting meetings, right? There's this sort of formula they go into. And oftentimes, I think it's changing a bit, but oftentimes they don't think about the impact that those behaviors have on the customers. Like, people are tired of this. They're getting inbound all the time from hundreds of companies. You and I are probably perfect targets for this stuff. How many inbound messages I get from people. It's overwhelming to the point where I don't want to listen to any of them anymore. We sort of cannibalized the marketplace that we're trying to sell into. And if they're asking you to do that as a founder, they're sort of asking you to participate in a cacophonous, a never-ending thing that in many cases is not going to be very effective. The returns are going to go lower. And number two is you're going to alienate the very people that you're trying to sell to, because you're not helping them. You're just trying to get something from them. But they want you to do it because they know that if you do a certain number of activity, you get a certain number of results and all this stuff that they can justify. But the market's changed, So as a founder, you have to start asking yourself these sort of questions. What's best for my business? And is this relationship one where I'm going to have the say to be able to make differences or changes in the way that they're going to ask me to do things? Second thing is, what does a CRO really do? What am I hiring one for? Like, do I want this person to oversee an entire revenue operation, or do I want someone to run sales? And if so, where are you getting informed from? Like, why does that role have two definitions? You should be questioning why that's the case. Like, why do you have two different ways in which the same title could be used differently? Doesn't make sense. It should be one thing. Why is there ambiguity, and why are you contributing to that ambiguity? And don't you see the value in having someone that oversees the entire revenue operation? And, I say it's more like just being really honest about your decision-making processes and what stage you're at. So these are sort of the things I talk to my clients about that are running companies. So they're thinking about things a little bit more, maybe do more due diligence than they normally do, asking themselves questions that they didn't know to ask before, and maybe hiring differently. So I know it's a long answer, but that's sort of like the way I speak to founders.
It's funny. I live it, and I've seen it, and I've been part of it in many cases. And I've made mistakes by coming in too early when they're not ready. And they're telling me what to do. And I'm thinking, I know what to do. I've done this many times. But what you're telling me is wrong. And if I tell you that what you're telling me is probably not the best idea, and I do it with the most sensitivity I can, explaining it nicely, and they get upset. And, they say, well, look, I've been here. This is my company. I started, and I've sold all these deals, and you should do it my way because I know how to do it. That being said, what can an early stage founder do right out of the gate, meaning the sales gate? I'm starting this, founder-led sales. What can they do right out of the gate to prepare for the future hire of a CRO?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, and I do speak to founders who are at that early stage. This is really difficult. So I don't want to sound like I'm trying to throw some magic suppository at somebody. It just doesn't work this way. I mean, if you're a founder of a company and you and I know this, it's really hard, man. It's a hard thing to do to build a company. It's not for the faint of hearted to try and grow a company. There's a lot at stake for you. You had to invest a lot of money if it's a software product in that engineering, and your reputation's on the line, and the pressure is immense. You've told a lot of people in your world that you're about to do this thing, and everyone's eyeballing you, and you don't want to look stupid, and you want to succeed. It's an extremely difficult thing. So being given that, I think the first thing is that you sort of have to be aware of that. You have to be able to say to yourself, okay, I've put myself into a vulnerable position here. I put myself in a situation where I'm creating a company and the risks are high and the pressure is high. And there is a form of emotional intoxication that comes with this that I have to be aware of, which means I'm not always going to make the best decisions because I'm in a state of heightened, anxiety. It's true. And so you sort of have to know that there's a filter that you have that might have you not see things as clearly because of that. It's no different than somebody whom naturally knows that after they have, let's say, 2 glasses of wine, that's the point at which they should consider walking over and handing their car keys over to their wife, right? So they know there's a point where they're being responsible for the circumstances they're putting themselves in. And maybe you need an advisor. Like you need somebody who's not drunk like you are to say, hey, I'm thinking about this stuff. I'm really nervous. I'm thinking about bringing on this person right now. What do you think? And you should have an advisor who's not just smarter than you, but also is willing to say, you're an idiot. You shouldn't do that. And you should listen to that person. So if you don't have that sort of relationship with somebody that is influencing you, who you trust, and you're willing to let them actually make decisions for you, it's almost like you walk over to your wife and you're like, do you think it's okay for me to drive? And she's like, no. And you go, okay. And you give her the keys. What are you talking about? I'm fine. I can drive. I'm perfectly fine. Like, you don't want to do that. You want to hand the keys over and say, okay, thank you. That's why I asked you this question, because I trust you and you're going to tell me the truth and I'm going to listen to you. Seriously, you need to have a relationship like that. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's not the board, because they sort of want you to do what they do. And I'm not saying you shouldn't trust them, but they have an agenda. They gave you money. So you need like a third party who's not invested, so to speak. They're just going to go, no, that's not the right thing to do. And here's why. And don't do that. Okay, that's one thing. Second thing is you have to think about the bigger picture. You have to ask yourself, okay, so for the first 10 million in business that we're going to do here, it's a sales operation. That's what it is. We have to get customers. And the reason we do is because getting customers to buy from us and paying for the product is an indicator that we're doing something that the public wants. That's the evidence. People are paying for it, and they're consistently paying for it. And, if I can do that enough, a $10 million worth of that is like, okay, we got something here. Okay. Can we please now turn this into something bigger? That's what you have to do. And so that stage of the company is like, when you think about a rocket, I don't know this exact number, but I think it's like 80% of the fuel of a rocket is used just to get it into the atmosphere. It's like all this fuel is like burned off just to get it to a place where it can have momentum. It's the same thing. So you sort of have to burn off a lot of fuel to get the company to a point where it can coast a little bit, which means that you shouldn't hire anybody in any sort of strategic position until you're in that atmosphere. And you have to determine what the atmosphere is. If we're going to say, all right, 15 million means we're in the stratosphere. That means we can start doing other things. You have to come up with that number. And it should be a sales effort, which means everybody that comes into the organization should be focused pretty much on looking at our network, our current network, the people inside of our world whom we already can influence, and seeing if they want to become partners of ours and getting product in their hands and having them use it so we can get customers, prove out the model, and then we have customers that we can test out and see how the product works. And that's it. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with having a sales effort for that period of time. But then there's a point where that's not going to work anymore. Now you have a complex organization. So you need, as a CEO or the founder, you need to think about I'm using this number randomly. It's not science. Let's just say for the purposes of this conversation, it's 10 million. You have to think after that, when my company is more complicated, that's when I need to start thinking about the way that I'm going to delegate things that right now I have to do. And I have to be okay with replicating myself with somebody whom I trust, that I'm going to give the authority, the autonomy, the resources, and the runway to be able to do things independent of me to help me scale the business. And if I'm not willing to do that because I'm too much of a control freak, I'm going to be the worst enemy of this business. It's similar to the thing I said before. It's like starting having self-awareness about my nature, right? And I think that if you don't think these things through, you're going to run into all the common problems that people. The most successful founders I find are the ones that have a lot of self-awareness and emotional intelligence. They're like, wow, I get all this stuff and I know this about myself. And they can talk about themselves in the third person. They can say, I do this a lot. I know I do that and I can't do this. Whereas, people that don't, they talk about things like, this is what I do. What do you mean? What's wrong with that? And, when you hear that, it's a red flag. It's like, okay, this person's not really got self-awareness. And so I think like these are the sort of things when I talk to my partners about, I'm trying to get them to have a bit more of a understanding of their nature and the situation and what's really at stake so that they make better decisions. I think that's maybe in short what I'm trying to say.
Yep. Which leads me to another question, which has been answered here and there throughout this conversation. As a CRO, what are the red flags that you should be looking for when talking to that founder, where when you hear them, you should run for the hills? You mentioned a few of those, but no, run for the hills. Get the fuck out of there because you're just setting yourself up for disaster.
Yeah, I would say the first thing is stage and timing, right? So if I see a CRO role posted in LinkedIn, the first thing I want to do is find out what stage are they at. Like if I find out they're under 10 million, I wouldn't even interview for the job. Maybe what I would do, you might want to do this. It's another strategy I talk to is, reach out to that company and tell them that they don't need a CRO, but you'd love to be their head of sales. So it's not a bad idea because that's what they really need, right? And if you have the sort of ambition where maybe it's, and I've had this situation many times, people say, I really like this company though. They got a great product and I think they're really good onto something. I really want to work for them, but they want to hire a CRO, but it's too soon. So what do I do? Do I take the job? I'm like, no, don't. Interview them like you're a consultant and go to them and say, look, I'm interested in your company. I saw this job description. If I may, my perspective on this is you don't need a CRO yet. You need a head of sales. And I like to do that. I like to be very clear about what you need right now. I'll be your head of sales and I'll run your sales department and I'll turn it into a juggernaut. And then down the road, when a CRO is needed, I'd be happy to talk to you about me taking that role. But right now, you need this. Now, that might be off mission for you. You might say, yeah, I don't want to be head of sales. I want to be a CRO. They say, well, then run away from that job because it's not going to be one.
Yeah, but then I can't get a license plate that says CRO on it.
Yeah, exactly. You can't get that license. Or the T-shirt or the hat. You can't get any of it. So don't do it. I would say just go find a job that the company's at the right stage. In other words, maybe a backup of it, and I'd say, if you have no flexibility, again, which is fine, if I know for a fact that I really want to be a chief revenue officer, that's great. Then find companies whom are at a stage where one's needed. So I wouldn't go look at companies that are under 25 million in revenues. I would just go for the companies that are bigger than that because that's going to be a better job. And that's where a CRO really is needed. And that's where there's going to be big opportunity for you to have a big impact on the business from an integration and alignment standpoint. If it's younger than that, you're going to be running sales.
What about the CRO's relationship with their board?
Yeah.
How do you uncover that? Because I've come into some situations where the board, to your point earlier, is telling the CRO what to do and the CRO becomes a puppet.
Yep.
And it's funny because the preparation for a board meet on a quarterly basis becomes an absolute disaster, waste of time. And it becomes like a dog and pony show where you come in and it's like they do these all day long. These investors, they do these board meetings all day long and they know exactly what you're going through and what you're dealing with. And you probably walk out of the room and they just laugh,
Yeah.
But
it's crazy. I've seen it. I think the thing that you got to do in that situation again is, I think that the context I'm trying to promulgate here is you got to come into that job interview like you're in charge, like you really know how to be a CRO uniquely, and they're hiring the right person. And you're sort of in a very persuasive way, telling them the way in which this bet should work because you're an expert, right? And part of that is before I take this job, I want to meet the board. I want to meet the board. I want to meet the board. I know it's going to sound like messed up, Mr. Founder, but I want to talk to the board without you. I want to meet them separately. because they're going to be a critically important part of my job, and I want to meet them and I want to get a sense of how they run things, because that's going to be a big part of my consideration. And if that's not part of the interview process, then this might not work for me. You really have to be that shrewd about it, because if it's not, that's not going to work. I tell you right now, if they're going to isolate you from the board during the interview process, there's a danger lurking on there. There's like a monster in the room that they don't want you to meet yet. They don't. What they're worried about there, and I hear this a lot, they don't want to scare away good candidates, which is the dumbest thing in the world. It's like you and I know at this point in our lives, like if you're dating somebody, you got to be as upfront about things as possible, because if you're an asshole, she's going to find out eventually. So let her know now. She might like you anyway. And why waste time? And I really think it's important for what's at stake for everybody that you get all that stuff out in the open. So I would say, 1, what stage are you at? 2, what do you think a CRO is? Number 3, describe for me how you see that working. Like, how would you implement that person? And what's your role in that? What's our relationship like in that? Number 3 is, I'd like to meet the board. How do you envision my relationship with the board? What sort of resources am I going to get? I mean, like, let's say, for example, you bring me in, what kind of authority and autonomy am I going to be getting in this job? Is it something I need to earn, or am I going to be given that by virtue of being given this role and being able to do the things and equipping me to do the things I need to do? And then that's when it might become, well, I don't know. What are you planning on doing? Then you can go, okay, I'm glad you asked. And this is where now you can lay out a vision for how a CRO should come into a company and the sort of resources they need and why. And my goal when I work with my clients is, you need to be the candidate that is the smartest and most informative, that when you leave, they're like, wow, that candidate made me really rethink the way we're looking at this role. That was really smart. When instead of just saying yes to me and trying to say yes to the questions I'm asking so they can get the job, they're actually challenging me about how the role will be successful. And a good company will want somebody like that. They'll want somebody to come in that's a change agent, as opposed to someone that says, yes, sir, no problem, sir, I'll do whatever you say, sir. And if you have companies that don't want someone like that, then you're right. You probably have a control freak who's got their own messed up vision of how it's supposed to work. I would say to this person, I'm curious, Mr. Founder, have you ever hired a CRO before? How did it go? Am I the first one or am I the second one? And if it didn't work out, what happened? What would you have done differently? Instead of saying it was the problem of the person you hired, what would you have done differently? What was your fingerprints on that failure? I want to know that. And if they can't answer it, well, then they have no self-awareness, because they should have 1,000 answers to that question, So these are the sort of things I'm trying to find out, because I want facts, but I also want to know what kind of person this is. I want someone that goes, yeah, man, I didn't know what I was doing. I thought okay, cool, great. I get it. I'm glad I'm here. We can figure it out together. If they go, well, I don't know, we just hired the wrong person. He was a jackass, Okay, well, that's great. So I think these are really important things that you need to sort of uncover, because a really mature grown-up who's taking a job of this importance should do this and not be seduced by titles and money, because you won't keep the job title and money very long. It'll last about 16 months. And then it's harder to get your next one,
The average tenure for a B2B SaaS CRO is 1.5 to 2.5 years. 1.5 years, 2.5
2.5 is not bad. I mean, if you get to 2.5 and it doesn't work out, I would say something else is going on. Because if you're there for 2.5 years, you've had a good amount of time to implement something that should be working. And if it's not, then it's usually what happens is, if it's that long, either it's not working and they just didn't know how to manage it and they let it go on too long and they should have gotten rid of you sooner. Or, what usually is some disruption where you've made it work and then the board goes, well, we need to bring in Bob now, and they replace you with Bob, because they like Bob and Bob's part of their team. It happens. Your success can become your biggest vulnerability, because now you built something that other people want to control. So, another part of it too is, I don't want to get into too much weeds here, but you should get a contract. If you're coming in as a chief revenue officer, you should not just be an at-will employee. That would be preposterous. You're a chief. So I would say if everything goes well and you like me, well, then I want a 2-year agreement, contractual agreement, to work here. And it's renewable after 2 years if I hit X number. Because why should you be the only one taking risk? There should be shared risk. And they may go, well, it is risky. We're hiring you and it's risky. I'm like, yeah, but you can fire me anytime you want. So there's more, I'm taking a much bigger risk. You want me to give up a lot of things. So, the good news about this position, the CRO position, is if it's being hired properly, there's a lot at stake and it should be serious and you should be able to have really serious conversations about very difficult things. And it should be received like, okay, this is a serious person whom we want to hire, a serious person who's making, demands on us, because that means that this person is taking the job seriously. And we want someone who takes the job seriously. You don't want to be like a wet noodle and go, okay, sure, I'll do that. Okay, I'll take that. It's not that's the wrong time to do that. This job is too important to not be mandating what works, the resources you need, the conditions you need to succeed, and that you can demonstrate that I know how to do it. And if you give me these things, it's going to be successful for everybody. That's really how it has to work,
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I want to switch gears and ask you a question that has been asked of me a lot over the last year or so. And you mentioned it earlier, the whole BDR, SDR role. Should I have one? Should I not have one? And I'm with you. Years ago, you as a BDR would make 100 phone calls a day. You sat in a bullpen. You had a boss that sat in the middle of the bullpen with on a control panel, listening to every phone call, recording it, using all the technology. And then, of course, you're supposed to send out 1,000 emails a week. The emails are all mediocre, boilerplate crap. And then you wonder, why isn't it working? So things are different today because technology has allowed for BDR teams to inundate the marketplace or their marketplace with messaging. No one wants to take your call. No one even has a work phone anymore. So if you're going to get someone's number, it's a mobile number. And I get numbers calling in all the time that either say one of three things. Someone I know, like Mom or Warren, and you're in my contact list. And I know who you are, and I pick up and I go, hey, Warren. Or a number that underneath it, courtesy of Verizon or AT&T, says spam, in which case I don't touch it. And then numbers that I don't know, that don't say spam and don't have a name on them, I don't really pick those up. If it's important, I'll let it go into voicemail. I'll listen to what that person has to say, and then I'll move on. I get about 5 of those a week. And often they are just shitty script reading, BDRs, salespeople trying to sell me something without having done a whole heck of a lot of research. So when I get into an organization as a CRO, I think to myself, all right, so we've got, I don't know, pick a number, $1 million, $2 million in budget for the SDR, BDR team, which includes salaries and commissions and benefits and laptops and whatever else, technologies and tools that we need, which are not cheap nowadays. Salesforce.com, 6 cents, all that stuff costs a lot of money. There's no ROI there. I've done the numbers over and over again. Even the best BDRs, there's just not a strong enough ROI there. So that's my position on it. Be curious as to what yours is and what would you do with that in 1 to 2 or 3 or 10 or whatever $1 million, depending on the size of your OpEx budget for sales and marketing to generate pipeline. What would you do with it? Here we are in September of 2024.
Yeah, I generally agree with you. I think that there is a place for that sort of a service. I think that if you had the right people, the right product, the right ICP, someone doing call setting would be a fine. It probably gets people to a different stage. I happen to believe more in, full cycle salespeople that just do everything. I mean, that's how you and I were raised, and that's what you do when you sell. You get your own freaking business. I think salespeople today become a bit coddled. They're accustomed to having people give them meetings. It's crazy to me. I mean, I never had that ever. I never once had that. And I'm not saying I think it would be a bad thing, but I could certainly tell you that having worked as long as I have and having to drum up my own business all the time, I know without any doubt that I have a much more greater competency at that than most people do because I had to do everything. It's only going to make you better, right? So Why wouldn't you want to have your people be as competent as possible? Now, that being said, there are some businesses where it might make sense. So, um, and those are getting fewer, right? I think the first thing I would say is, strangely, it's either a really massive TAM where you could sell to anybody, and so these people just make phone calls all day because the product is pretty much a fit. Everybody like Salesforce, like anyone can buy Salesforce, any company can get Salesforce. There's an instance of it for every company at this point. So just call whoever, So that means you sort of have endless dials you can make, and so the numbers go up high enough that you can get some people on the phone. Plus, a company like Salesforce, again, to keep that going, is they have a good reputation. So, people are more likely to maybe want to talk to someone from a company they already trust. But that goes to my second point.
Yeah, but we're talking about, Warren, we're talking about the startup world.
I know, I get it. So in that respect, I think it's a completely bad thing to do, because I think that to the amount of return you get on it, I don't think it's worth it, not to mention the fact that, like, for the first, 3 to 6 months, to bring on BDRs and SDRs, you're sort of developing what an SDR and BDR cadence is going to sound like, because you don't have any history of it. So you're kind of testing the market with a lot of people, and it's a lot of stuff to test to figure out what works. I don't know. I work with a client right now. They have a very interesting product where what they do is something that's very easy to understand, and it's not difficult to buy, but it has a big long-term lifetime value. So for them, they're thinking like, I can explain this to you. I don't want to get to, I don't want to reveal who they are, but I could explain the service to you in like 3 minutes what they do. And I can explain why it's valuable. And I can explain to you how cheap it would be for you to do it. And, that not all companies are like that, but I could see why somebody might justify in that case. Well, it's so easy for these guys to make phone calls to these people and just say, hey, here's this thing. We can do X. It costs this. And, there's a lot of people that might say, all right, fine, I'll take a call. But most companies aren't like that, right? Most companies are more complicated and they take more time. So my inclination would be, if someone came to me, which I think is the problem today, is they just come to me or they say, well, I got to stand up my SDR group. I'm like, well, why? Why do you have to set up your SDR group? Like, provide me your business case for that. Well, what do you mean? It's what you do, literally. It's like, it's what you do. That's the answer. I was like, what do you mean? It's become this sort of, just you do that, and that's a very lazy reason to do anything. You should be able to get a business case for it. So I kick the tires on that. Many times it turns out it's not the right thing. What I would do with that money is, I think that BDRs and SDRs are not an extension of sales. They're an extension of marketing. That's what I think. And I think that marketing should get that money. And I think that marketing should do a better job with the money, because what marketing is usually tasked to do is to get leads. They're doing the same thing. If I tell my marketing department, I want you to get me leads, they're going to do what a BDR does. They might do it differently, but they're doing the same thing, which is coercing people to get onto the phone. So why would I have two groups doing the same thing? I'd rather have marketing not get me leads. I'd rather have marketing educate and inform my prospects so that they're smarter and that they associate their increased intelligence or knowledge with my company. So that way, when I call them, they're like, oh yeah, that's right. You guys, I heard about you and I read this thing and I'm much smarter now as a result. I trust you already. Let's talk. That's a much, much smarter use of your dollars, right? Because there's branding in there, there's education in there, there's support in there. You're fulfilling on a lot more needs of your customer base, which is to make them feel like they've gotten something, as opposed to you want to take something from them. And I think that that's the focus that people should be on more today. The problem with that is it takes longer and you don't get the stimulation of some sort of return, like how many calls did you have this week? And so if I'm measuring you, incentives are the whole thing, Dan. If I'm incentivizing a business to get as many calls a week or as many meetings a week, okay, I mean, I guess I could do that. But the second thing is, what's the quality of those meetings? What's the quality of those calls, And, then it becomes sort of fudgy, but, that's what I was told to do. Those are my metrics. So that's my incentives. So that's what I'm going to do. And so people manage against what they're being measured against. And I think we have to measure people against different things. That's how I would reallocate those dollars.
Yep. I agree with you on all fronts that today's approach is different than yesterday's approach. And if you are a decision maker and you are thinking, using the phrase, well, that's what you're supposed to do, the supposed to part is going to kill you. You're supposed to actually generate leads. That's what you're supposed to do. Leads that turn into actual revenue. So how do you do that is the real question. And whether you do it through 100 phone calls or 1,000 emails, or you do it through thought leadership, to your point, or you do it by going out to events and conferences and meeting people and pressing the flesh a little bit, as they say, and having meaningful conversations. I find a very important one is to go online. From a business sense, typically it's LinkedIn, but there are other places where you could go and look to see where those conversations are taking place and just find a way to get involved in the conversation. I was talking to a woman this morning. We discussed this exact topic. And I said to her, what is one of your passions that you love to do outside of work, of course? And she said, I love to cook. I said, all right. If you were walking through town or you were walking wherever, and in a group of, let's say, 5 people were talking about cooking and you overheard them, without even asking her the question, she said, oh, I'd find a way to get right into the conversation. And I said, and how would you do that? And she gave me some examples. And I said, and what would be the purpose? She said, because now I'm going to meet 5 new people that are going to see me as a leader, or not a leader, but an expert in cooking. And I may be able to exchange some recipes with them and share some best practices. And before you know it, they're all wondering, who are you? What do you do? Can you come over and cook for me? Meaning, if you did this as an expert in whatever you're selling, call it an AI solution that helps go-to-market organizations using AI, and you had that kind of approach, they'd say to you, who are you? What's your name? Oh, I'm Dan Hurwitz. I'm an AI specialist. Yeah, you are. I could tell by the conversation that you entered, and wow, that was some really great insight that you have there. Hey, what does your company do? Oh, you know what? We need that. And to your point, it takes longer, but it's so much more effective. And and the credibility and the trust is built in 100%. With it.
And it's certainly worth doing. But the problem is that the runway requirements are not consistent with what's necessary for that to happen. So what I think I see happen a lot is things are being done in parallel, right? So while we're building equity with the marketplace and building a brand and building credibility and educating people, I also have people making a lot of phone calls at the same time. So I'm sort of trying to make up for, while the steak is cooking, I'm going to make some poppers that I can eat, because I'm hungry right now,
Yeah.
What ends up happening is you fill up on poppers and the steak comes out. You don't want to eat anymore because you've sort of figured out that,
you're making me hungry, man.
Yeah, you're not hungry anymore, So you just think, what, just keep doing it the way we're doing it. Just keep eating poppers. That's what happens.
Yeah, I hear you.
So I think like there's a discipline required today that has to do with market changes, market developments, technological advancements, context changes, right? Customer preferences, that if we don't listen to those things, we're not being smart. We just can't keep doing the same stuff because it's just what does. You have to say,
what, constantly got to challenge the status quo, constantly kick the tires and see if it's working. This has been a really interesting conversation. I want to have more of them with you because I think your perspective is, it's really sharp. It also aligns with a lot of the things that I believe, but there were a few things that you shared today that I hadn't thought of before, and I really appreciate and like them. But anyway, thanks for taking the time to share your perspective with me, Warren. It's always great to talk to you, pal.
Well, thank you for having me. I love having these conversations with you.
All right. Take care.
You got it.